Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of this series called Secrets of Greatness. My name is Omer, and today's episode, I have another very, very special guest for you guys. In this episode, I have a guest with me who has spent almost a decade in management consultancy, and now she has moved on to Amazon, where she is the digital innovation lead for Amazon Web Services for Canada. Her and I, we were actually friends at Rotman. We went to Rotman together, and I can actually really testify that she is undoubtedly one of the hardest working people that I have come across. And one thing I truly admire about her is her willingness to, help others out. So please join me in welcoming the very amazing Debashree Dasgupta. Hey, Debashree, how's it going?
Hey Omar, good. How are you?
Fantastic. Are you excited to be here?
Oh yeah, totally.
I'm so glad you agreed to do this. I mean, I know you and I we spoke about this earlier and you were really packed, so I'm really grateful to you for making the time to be on the show and to be giving us, not just me, but all the audience, especially the youth and the young working professionals, the opportunity to hear directly from you. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to help.
Awesome. The first question that I want to ask you is that, we spoke about the fact that you have spent more than a decade in the management consultancy area before you moved on to Amazon. And at Amazon, you're now the digital innovation lead for Canada AWS, right? And a number of the young students and young working professionals early in their careers, they would absolutely love to be in that kind of like a prestigious position. So to them, you're definitely a huge role model, right? As you're definitely a success story to them. So very bluntly, Debashree, tell us, what does it really take? What does it really take to get to that kind of like a position in a career?
Um, Interesting question. I think, and I'm not gonna give the same answer like hard work and all of that. I think that one is just a known fact, right? I think it's what you want to settle for. Like just
Huh.
to give you a background for myself, when I first started, I wasn't like I graduated in engineering, right?
Mm,
Chemical engineering, that too. So you can imagine it's been a huge shift for me to go from engineering to working at a tech company, right? Like, how do you make that shift? And when I first started out in engineering,
mhm,
I knew pretty early on that it was not a place that I wanted to be, partly because um, it's really important to know what you want in life and what's going to make you happy, right? That's really important. And I knew one of the things that would make me happy is to be in a field where I got to interact with different types of problems rather than focus on a specific industry. So I knew I had that goal in mind. I did a lot of research and networking to make sure that, because everyone would look at my profile and be like, okay, you have an engineering background, you've done 16 months of work and this is when I graduated. It was 16 months of work at a pharmaceutical. Like
mm,
an internship at a pharmaceutical at the time called Merck,
yeah.
where I did a lot of R&D for pills. Like we used to actually physically make pills,
Oh,
um,
wow.
yeah, for clinical trials, right? And I had the option of going back there, but I wanted to give engineering another chance, and that's when I moved to Fort McMurray
Mm,
from McGill. So like I finished in Montreal and I moved to Fort McMurray, and that was the time when I was like, okay, well, this is my second engineering job in a different industry in oil and gas. Um, I knew at that point that I wanted something that was, more fast moving. I wanted to get a taste of different industries. I knew my strength at the time was to, get really familiar with different problem ideas. Like I knew like I wanted to solve problems and
mm,
I wanted to do in different industries. And the only career that seemed evident at that point was consulting. So to answer your question, it's really important to know what's going to make you happy early on, right? What's going to make you happy and what's going to what skill set do you have that sort of matches that? And of course, there's always this thing of hard work, right? Like, what's your vision, right?
Yeah.
What's your vision? You know, what are you willing to settle for? Because I could have at the time just stayed in Fort McMurray, like a lot of my peers did. They stayed in Fort McMurray. Some of them were happy, some were unhappy, right?
Right.
It's about wanting to make that change for yourself.
So tell me, understand one thing. It's a very interesting point that you bring up, Debashree, that knowing what you want and knowing what you want to settle for, right?
Hmm.
It's very interesting. A lot of the young ones, especially, right? It's very difficult for them to cancel out. There's so much noise these days, right? A lot
Hmm.
more noise than what you and we had when we were starting off our careers.
Hmm.
There's social media. There are parents, our teachers. There's like our friends. There's always these constant noise. How do you what would you recommend to these kids who are listening to you? Like, how do you figure out what you actually really want and not get too influenced by the external noise that you're hearing constantly?
That's an interesting question. I know when I was younger, I struggled with that as well. It's a hard one,
Yeah,
right? Because you have all of these societal pressures to be a certain way, to act a
yeah,
certain way. You know, what's considered success in society are
exactly.
very different things. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I learned early on that it didn't matter to me what other people thought of what my opinions were in different parts of my life. And the way I did that is I read a lot. I used
Mm,
to read a lot of different points of view. You know, it's especially in that age group, and now with social media and stuff, it becomes very difficult sometimes to do that, right? Like to actually
yeah,
sit in one place and stay with your thoughts.
yeah.
But one thing I wish I had done more was to spend more time with myself. Like pick up
Mm,
that hobby that is really going to help clarify your thoughts. And that for me right now is reading. So I could
yeah,
read any book and it will just help me focus on, like once I'm done reading a chapter, like I'll come out of it. It's almost like a diversion that I had reading the book. I'll come out of it and be like, okay, you know, start thinking about that problem that had been bugging me, and then all of a sudden the answers come to me, right? So it's come now habitually. And the one
mm,
thing that I would say is that instead of like Instagram or like Facebook and all of these like shiny
yeah,
objects, right? I'm not saying not to do them, because then, you know, especially in that age group, you want to be part of the crowd and all of that stuff, which is fine. But it's also important to find that 1 hour that you're going to spend every day with yourself doing that activity that you really like, because that will start as you grow older. It's going to start giving you that clarity that you need, whether
yeah.
that's painting, it could be reading, it could be, you know, maybe reading the news, maybe like just disconnecting from all of that, in order to get there.
Yeah, it's really amazing you say that because actually I myself realized my love for reading, it kind of like got reignited a couple of years ago. And to me, that's like my, similar to you, that's like my time where it's just me and what I'm reading and my thoughts, and that's it. And the kind, it's, isn't it amazing? Like the kind of sometimes clarity you, like in a snap of a finger, you get some clarity for like a particular problem that you were thinking of, whether it's work related problem or even sometimes a personal problem at home or something, right? You sometimes you just get clarity by reading, spending that time reading a particular chapter. I don't know what it is, but it certainly has helped me. Is there a particular book that you have read which you would recommend kids to read if they are looking to gain that kind of clarity in terms of like what should I do, right? Like there's this always this question, like especially the young ones who are going into university or coming out, like I don't know what to do, I'm not too sure about my career, is something that I have heard number of times. So is there a particular book that you have come across that can really, if they read, if these kids read them, they read that book, it'll give them clarity?
I mean, I can give some general book recommendations that have played a role in my
Yeah.
life. There's one book I'm reading right now, which I'm really enjoying. It's called Settle for More.
Okay.
It's written by Megan Kelly. So she was the Fox News reporter.
Uh-huh.
So if you've seen Bombshell, this is basically her biography. Super interesting, right? Because it gives you, as you can tell, I love biographies. Okay,
Mm,
so even just reading like Steve Jobs and like reading the life of the people that
yeah.
have really made a difference in the world, and like having that bar set for yourself, that I'm not saying that I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs, or like that's not what the book is
Yeah.
intended to do. But in your world you can make that difference, right? Whether
Right.
that's a small scale or a large scale, it doesn't matter. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, it's making that impact. So I would say, like, biographies are a good one to like just get a real world understanding of how people behave in their lives, or what
Right.
makes someone, you know Steve Jobs, what
Yeah.
makes Steve Jobs, right? And even if you don't want to read books, there's if you look at Netflix, right? Like everyone watches all these shows and stuff on Netflix. By the way, I cannot binge watch any show. It's very
Me
difficult for
too.
me. Yeah, it's
Can't.
just very difficult for me to sit in front of the TV and watch. I just feel like I'm wasting time. So
Same here.
the only one I did binge watch though was Inside Bill's Brain.
I saw that, and
Yeah, and I
I
really enjoyed that one.
yeah,
I
that
thought
was
it was
amazing.
just, yeah, he's just like such a fascinating person, right? Like so fascinating,
So
really,
fascinating.
yeah, really like it gives you, I think the whole show was really well made, and it talks
It,
about how he, recuperated his personality
yeah.
from being Bill Gates to where he is now, and the Bill and Melinda Gates
Yeah.
Foundation. And I really enjoyed it, and I think even just watching those kind of things gives I think a new appreciation for the things that really matter.
Right. No, I completely agree with you, and it's actually a very interesting point that you say, Debashree, that like reading biographies or watching these kind of like documentaries on Netflix or Amazon Prime, wherever you're watching it, it allows us to get a peek inside the brains of these so-called successful or great people, right? And once you try to understand their psychology, what's going on in their head, how did they cope with failures? Because all of them went through failures, absolutely, right? How
Hmm.
did they cope with like personal tragedies? How did they cope with like all different kinds of shit that gets thrown at them? And it's amazing to see um, get that peek into their brain through those biographies. And I think from what you have said, I think what the great recommendation for the kids who are listening is find out who that role model is for you and pick up his or her book, right? I'm pretty sure or find a documentary of that person um, that you who's a role model to you, and learn more and more and research more and more about that person, so that you can really understand what it actually took for that person to get to where they are. And then ask yourself, are you willing to do those things? Are you willing to take those steps to get to the same point? And
Hmm.
sometimes, as Debashree earlier mentioned, you don't have to be Steve Jobs, like in that grand, the aura of, the real Steve Jobs, but you can be your own Steve Jobs at your home, in your workplace, in your team, right? You don't have to be that big or enormous in terms of the stature, right? So yeah, thanks, definitely, Debashree. That's a great point. So thank you for sharing that. Um, let's talk a little bit more about personal development, right? You spoke about reading, and I think that's we kind of we can I think you and I we can agree on the fact that that's one thing that you particularly do and you enjoy doing, and when you want to invest in your personal growth. There are some folks who do say like, hey, Omer, you know I'm not a big fan of reading. So how else do I invest in myself, in my personal development, in my personal growth, in my self-improvement? What recommendation do you have for them?
I like, to be honest, reading has been more prominent now with COVID, right? Because
Yeah.
people are trying to pick up the hobbies that they may not have done because of their um, you know, busy lives or whatever, right? And I was definitely in that boat for a while where I would spend a lot of hours working, and I just didn't get time to do it, or I didn't make time, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm making time, I have it, right? So reading, I totally agree. I think that really helps, even if you read a few pages a day. Other ways of personal development, like, it doesn't have to be always reading related. Sometimes it's also dependent on one thing I did really effectively in high school was I volunteered a lot.
Mm.
Um, it's unfortunate I don't do that now. I kind of stopped right before I started the MBA, and it hasn't picked up since. But yeah, I used to, about things that really matter to you, right? Like in high school, I volunteered at a senior home, which was, at the time they didn't know how to send emails and stuff, and it was something simple like that, right? And I would help them send emails to their family, right?
Oh, that's so amazing.
Yeah,
That's
so I did a lot of that in high school. And I think it was partly because my parents were very like, you have to, we had just moved from Middle East to Canada when I was in grade 8. And my parents were like, you like, this is one really nice way to understand the culture here too, right? Like,
mm.
what is this whole thing about volunteering? Because a lot of times when you come, you're like, what, volunteering, you're going to be
Yeah.
working for free? But it's, the whole thing is not about that. It's about giving back to the community. And I think it really grounds you as a person. So whether, figure out what that is of importance to you, right? Is it things around immigration? Like, for instance, there's so many volunteer stuff you can do around helping new immigrants come into the
Yeah.
country, right? Is it about, helping people who can't help themselves? Like, for instance, in an elderly care home where people don't know a certain skill set, do you have that skill set to offer? My sister, for instance, she's huge into like animal welfare, right? Like,
Mm.
for her whole life has been around being at the Humane Society and helping those things. And I think personal development, the reason why that helps is, first, it keeps you grounded. The second thing is also, you meet people there who joined that organization for a reason. So networking with other folks who are in that, understanding why they joined it, and getting a glimpse into the life of other folks who are in that, like, that really is, like, to me, like talking to other people. If you don't want to
Yeah.
read, talking to other people who are from different walks of life and who are not normally in your network,
Yeah.
that really is a huge input of growing as a person, right?
No, absolutely. I love that answer. Honestly, I think volunteering is really, really undervalued. And you said a very interesting thing, like, when you came to Canada from the Middle East, at least back then, when you and I, we kind of like, when we came here in the 2000s, at that time, at least for me, even volunteering was kind of like an unknown area, because it's not that common, at least in the area where I came from, right? And I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is such an important point, where it's something that you cannot, it's not just about giving back to the community that you're serving, or whether it's old care homes, or at a shelter, or at a animal welfare, or at a zoo, wherever you're volunteering. It has to align with your interests, right? Whatever you're volunteering, one, you will automatically develop some sort of like an interest in that area. And even if you don't, you will learn more about about your own self. You'll gain that self-awareness as well, through the process, in my opinion. You will learn, like, hey, this is a cause that I'm actually really emotionally connected to, or I'm not, right? And it's important to have that kind of like self-awareness early on. And not to mention about the fact that, talking to different people who are in different walks of their life, as you just said earlier, I think that is super, super crucial, because that really gives us different perspectives, that we normally don't come across. And that's
Hmm.
what self-development is all about. One of the reasons why I read books is because, to me, it feels like the author, who I do not know, he's talking directly to me. I'm understanding a new person's perspective on a particular topic. right?
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, as you said, when you're volunteering, you meet different people. You need to talk to them. You must talk to them, learn more about them, be inquisitive, so that you can gain more and more information and knowledge about different industries or different functions or different areas of life. So no, that's such a great point you raised. Thank you so much for that. Um, One last question. I want to shift gears to leadership now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Leadership is huge. Leadership is important. Huge part of, especially as a lot of my young students, right? They aspire to be great leaders of tomorrow. And Debashree, no doubt you are in a in a great leadership position at AWS, Amazon Web Services. So help us understand, what does leadership mean to you? And two, what advice would you give to the young ones listening to you on this topic of leadership?
What leadership means to me, I think that like leadership is not always about, having the biggest teams or being able to um sometimes it's like kind of like a title contest, right? Like,
Mm,
oh, I have the biggest title, hence I must be a biggest leader. I don't think that's not how we view leadership within the our company, at least. One of the things we say quite often, which is part of the reason why I love working where I work, is because they say everyone is a leader. So one of the biggest, so it doesn't matter where you work. For instance, you could be a fulfillment center associate, you're a leader, or you are, work at AWS, you're a leader. It doesn't matter, right? Like, we're all leaders at the company. And one of the biggest qualities of being a leader is ownership, right? So if you really want to be a leader, and if you really want to show what you can do as a leader, the biggest thing that you can do is to take ownership of whatever task has been given to you. So whether it takes you to get your hands dirty when your team is completely overloaded with other stuff just to get the job done, or if it is or if it requires you to teach other people and help other people to get the job done, right? Taking ownership of your business and taking ownership of whatever you have been tasked with,
mm,
and doing it with ultimate diligence to get the job done, is what to me is, the signs of a good leader. I've seen in my different companies that I've worked at, I've seen some really great leaders, and I've seen some leaders who are more fixated on the title, right? Like, I'm a leader and I'm your manager, hence you must do what I ask you to do, right? That's one aspect. I've seen leaders who are like, okay, this is what we need to get to. Let's figure out how we can get this done together, right? And they'll be sitting side by side with me trying to get things done. Same with me, right? Like, if I have a team, I sit side by side with them to get it done. And to me, that's leadership, right? Where you're taking ownership, you're helping others in the process as well, whether they are subordinates to you or not. It doesn't
mm.
matter. um, so, long-winded answer, but hopefully that gives you a bit of context in terms of what leadership means to me.
Absolutely. I think it does. I think, to me, at least, I think the biggest point you made, Debashree, is the fact that don't chase those titles, right? Don't chase those titles. Leadership is not just about those titles. It is about your action and taking ownership of of the actions that you're doing, right? Whether
Yes.
you're working at a company or you are volunteering, you have a job to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are going above and beyond and making sure you do what is required and do more than that, that in itself is, leadership. Making sure the team is put first, making sure you're working alongside. I think you use the word side by side, right? Making
Mm-hmm.
sure you're working side by side alongside with your team members, even if you are above them in the corporate hierarchy. It doesn't matter. Work with them side by side. Make them feel like equals, right? Make them feel like equals to give them that motivation and that sort of like empowerment as well. to
Yeah, and I'll just add, like, in a corporate setting, a lot of people think of leadership as, like, the person with the biggest title, the most pay, all of those things, right? But actually, the leaders, the best leaders that I've seen are not those people. It's the people who really inspire others to, get to that end goal,
yeah.
right? And that person could be, someone who's subordinate to you. It could be
Mm,
someone who doesn't have that title at all, but um, it's that charisma of being able to drive everybody to a common goal, right? And
yeah.
that person is the leader.
That's such a great point. Like, it's not about like whether he or she is my manager or not. I could actually be inspired by the janitor. Who knows, right? It's not about that. It's not about the title, and it's about who you are, who you get inspired by, or are you inspiring other people to put their best foot forward, and are you inspiring them and motivating them in the right direction? That's really well, really, really well put. If you were to, you know, tell the kids or the audience how to hone their leadership skills, what would be that one actionable tip, something actionable that they can do to hone their leadership skill?
um I mean, at that age group, I would say that, I mean, we talked about volunteering and stuff already. I think in every walk of life, right? Find opportunities to help other people.
Mm,
That's something that I've learned, even now. Like, if somebody asks me for help, I rarely ever say no if I have time for it and it aligns with what they're asking for, and I can make time for it. I will never say no
and I
to
can
someone.
testify to that.
Yeah, because it's important for me to see you successful, right? And it's important for me to make sure that if somebody does ask me for help, that I can, if it's in my means to help them, I will.
Yeah,
And that's really important. A lot of times you'll see that, when you ask others for help, there is a sense of competitiveness, and like, oh, if I help them, like, what does that mean, and like all those extraneous thoughts. And I think if you want to be a good leader, that those things are, it's really important that if you can make time, you help the people who matter to you.
right.
You, whether it's, sometimes they may be random people, like, understand intent, right? Like, why are they
Mm,
asking for your help? What's make sure you do that, right? Because you also don't want to, like, put yourself out there and help like 100 people, and then you don't have time for
yeah,
yourself, right? You have to prioritize what you need to do. But around those constraints, try to figure out the context and help people, because it comes back, like, it's like, I am where I
yeah.
am because of some very key people in my life. And if they hadn't helped me at the time that I needed it, it would have been very difficult for me to be here. So it comes back, karma, right? It all comes back. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's actually so well put. Again, Debashree, it's about finding people or being open to serve in a way, right?
Hmm.
Anybody can be a leader as long as you're trying to help somebody, right? And that could be for anything. So for all of you who are listening, find ways in which you can help other people out, right? That will really, really shape you, shape your character, shape your leadership skills, and really, it will give you the opportunity and the experience to be a better person. And leadership, at the end of the day, is about being that person who is always willing to help other people out. And if you think about it, and Debashree, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, all of those great leaders that we all talk about and we all read about, like the Bill Gates of the world or the Steve Jobs of the world, they never got into that position for the fame or the title or the money in the first place. They were there because they were driven by some sort of like a cause, right? For Steve Jobs, it was all about breaking the status quo that he was seeing around him. He was driven by that. He wanted to help people to and change the status quo. For Bill Gates, it was all about his passion for helping humanity be more productive, and he did that through putting a personal computer in the homes of every household in the United States and now the world, pretty much, right? So it's not about the money, it's not about the title, it is about helping and serving a particular cause. That's what true leadership, as
Yeah,
Debashree
and
said.
yeah, and I'll add one more thing. There's a
Please.
concept that's been coming up a lot, right? It's around the concept of servant leadership. Like, I don't know if you've seen that, and you'll hear it a lot. Like, there's this whole thing about, like, I'm a servant leader, right? And if you read the tenets of that, right, and the difference between traditional leadership and being a servant leader, what that means, like, there is certain things that make you a servant leader. For instance, listening, right? Traditionally, in leadership, there was a thing of authority that, hey, if I ask you to do something, you shall do it, right? And I don't want any ifs and buts, sort of
Yeah,
thing. But now with servant leadership, how things have changed is that you empathize with your team, right?
yeah,
You figure out what you listen, right? Because I think a lot of times in our society we are driven to talk. So if you're sitting in a group of 10 people, you'll see that 8 out of the 10 people are going to be talking, and then there's only 2 people who are actually listening. But then when the 2 people actually talk, they have basically absorbed all of this information from the 8 people, and they are able to process their
yeah,
thoughts. And when they speak it, you're like, wow, how did you come up with that,
yeah.
right? Like, right? So those listening, persuasion, like all of those things, like the concept of servant leadership, I think, is becoming more and more
Yeah.
prominent now in this day and age.
Absolutely, and it goes back to even if I may, it what you have just said, it ties so perfectly well with the Simon Sinek's book, "The Leaders Eat Last," right?
Hmm.
And the other thing it really resonated with me was Nelson Mandela. He always spoke about leading from behind, right? Like
Hmm.
he's not about leading from the front; he was always about leading from behind.
Hmm.
And that's what you're talking about in a way, if you think about it, that it's not about you being the first person in the room to talk about, when you are in a meeting room, it's usually like the leader will, whoever is the manager or the VP or someone, they will start off. The paradigm is shifting. The paradigm is shifting to the leaders speaking last, because then, as you said, they have now absorbed all the information that they need to hear from their team, from their people, and now they can speak with even more data points and make better and more informed decisions collectively.
Yeah, well put,
Yeah,
for sure.
no, that's great. I think that's extremely well said, Debashree. Those were basically all the questions that I had. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I actually really do. I think there were some absolute gems that you threw at us, especially for the audience. I really hope you guys watching, you guys got an opportunity to learn from a leader like Debashree, and you guys gained some really powerful insights from her.